Okay. All right. Tomo Moriwaki, you're here again. You're here for the first time. Tell people, give people your deal. Who are you? What is your deal? Short summation.
Sure. My name is Tomo Moriwaki. I've been a game designer for at least 26 years. I'd like to say. I feel like I'm losing count over the years. I mostly a systems designer over the course of time. Although now, as a co-founder of a company, I feel like all I do is talk to clients. I got my start in '97 at Treyarch. Um, my claim to fame is probably the best thing, closest thing to claim to fame is Spider-Man 2 in 2004. I was creative director on that project. In 2014, I started a small studio called Hyperkinetic Studios, and we've done tons of client work projects, and we have a game in Steam Early Access called Epic Tavern, which was a game about systematizing storytelling.
All right. And so, okay, that's a good summary. Now we've got a series of questions here. Some are broad, some are not. I'll start with the broadest one. And why is making games so hard? Is making games hard, and why is making games so hard?
So games is definitely hard. I think its difficulty somehow defies normal logic over and over and over again. But I'd say the biggest reason why it's hard is because if it's worth doing, there's a certain amount of new ideas or unprecedented nature to the interactivity, and that alone sort of puts you into an uncertain enough space that a lot of the rules you might have under your belt, a lot of the ways in which you like to approach things, that they have to be modulated a little bit at the very least. I mean, I feel like another factor is that the scale of what we have to do to make these things has just kept growing ever since the early 2000s. I feel like, when I got my start, I was sort of in the middle of this sudden increase in complexity and scale. And even though that was like 25 years ago, we still haven't quite got it all figured out.
Yeah, I know. I kind of feel like we're doing this weird thing where it's like we're taking two things that kind of don't exist. Like we're taking like aesthetics and numbers, pulling them out of thin air, and like rolling them into a ball and trying to create fun, which is another unquantifiable substance,
Sure.
and delivering it to people. And it's kind of like it's just a weird thing to sort of like, what is fun? Like, how do you determine? I mean, when you're working on a game too, it's like, how do you even know it's fun? You've been working on it for so long, but how do you know what you're working on is good when you're so close to it and it's something that's so hard to evaluate?
I feel like looking back to the early years, we'll say like the first 15 years or so, we didn't really know. I think that we sort of followed our gut. We liked the games that we liked, and we could sort of cut and paste a little bit of that into the experiences we made. I don't think there was a lot of science around understanding things. We didn't use words like engagement back then. I think fun is quantifiable. I think you can start by sort of appreciating how much time a person wants to spend with a thing. I think you can start understanding sort of how much of their time away from the experience is spent thinking about it, or how much of a desire they have to talk about it, right? We can measure a lot of things about a person having a good time. But that's just the start, right? Trying to actually make something that causes them to do that, super sophisticated and complicated. I think a lot of us have gotten lucky over the years, and that we're still trying to figure out the right description for what that means.
So, one thing I just learned, I'm inserting into these lines of question because you mentioned it earlier, is you have aphantasia.
Yeah, yeah. So if there's like a scale that goes from like zero meaning like truly no visual imagination, to 10 being like a 4K video running in your head at all times, I think I'm somewhere in the 1 range. So I think it's about as low as it can be and still be functional.
So how hard is it to design games with no, essentially, well, for those who don't know what aphantasia is, it's like having no mind's eye, right?
Yeah, it's basically, the way I like describing it is that there's no visual information when you try to recall things. So,
How do you remember what people look like? Or can you not? Are you face blind?
so I'm not face blind. I'm actually really good at identifying faces. So I think obviously there's like a hardware accelerator in us that understands faces, that can parse faces. So that obviously that module works fine for me.
Interesting. So how do you design games? Like, well, this is something you learned recently, right? About yourself.
Fairly recently, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I might have come to a thought that I don't see things as well in my memory as other people do, like maybe 10 or 12 years ago, as like a conversation late at night or something. But otherwise, I didn't really think about it until watching a YouTube video that explained it with a lot more clarity, and then it was really fun and interesting thought to have. But it didn't appear to have any effect on designing games. Certainly, and it's worth noting, I went to art school for 8.5 years, and I think it's because I couldn't see things in my mind's eye. It's because I wanted those things. So I learned sort of a rules-based, systems-based approach to creating visuals, which that might very well have contributed significantly to the game design experience that I've had. I mean, I didn't, so back when I'm like, making these games from 97 to, we'll say 2021, obviously I had no idea what Aphantasia even really was. And so I can't even say if it had an effect.
Well, did you notice, like, I actually know other game designers who discovered they have aphantasia later, and they kind of realized their design process was different from other designers, and they related it to aphantasia. Like, just like the lack of visual reference or being able to have a visual reference in interacting with other designers and how they work. When you discovered you have aphantasia, did you have any aha moments about things that you do that now make more sense, or did it allow you to become more effective at communicating ideas to people because you kind of understand what's going on internally is different when you're trying to explain a concept?
So it definitely helps now. I think back then, I think it worked in my favor because games are a collection of systems. And the way those systems interact it's not visual, right? It is structural, it's mathematic, it's logical. It isn't, the visual memory wasn't necessary for that, right? Designing systems and progression and the graph of all the animations that fit together for the combat system. I mean, the poses that they were in. I mean, I think the art school maybe helped fill that in so it wasn't a weakness. But the actual act of building the architecture of the systems that the players interact with isn't a visual memory experience. It's tables and graphs and maybe the artiest thing, most artsy thing it is are curves and the way they interact with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, although some games more than others, right? I mean, I almost think that you can kind of gravitate towards more systems-based games because that kind of is more suited for somebody with aphantasia. People that I know that have it work a lot in spreadsheets, lists. Systems lend themselves to that kind of design. Whereas,
Definitely.
Some games, almost the aesthetics and the feel outweigh the systems design, even though there always is a system.
Well, and it's interesting though, as game designer, I mean, at least in the early 2000s console development, we relied very heavily on the art director for visuals, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe that was also another part of the puzzle as well.
Right. Like the interaction between the art and the gameplay, in some cases that was taken, like the artist had to actually handle that.
Although probably in my decision-making process, I wouldn't weight visuals as strongly.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably had an effect on maybe some of our inclinations and the way we decided things. Spider-Man 2 tolerated a pretty low-res city in its far LOD.
Yeah.
And maybe that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
So you mentioned, you studied sculpture earlier in your career, well, before your career.
Yeah.
Has your background in sculpture and fine art guided your career at all?
I think from the perspective of baby steps, definitely. Because I went from sculpture to 3D art. And I think, so, spatial perception and caring about art, liking comic books and all the kind of normal nerdy kid stuff that kind of like is in and around video games. I was involved. I knew enough to participate or talk about it. So I think it all had an effect. It was all influential. Not as much though in the grand scheme of things as maybe I was expecting, but I don't know what I was expecting. I never really saw games from the art standpoint. I would see beautiful things and like that, but I was always sort of trapped in the kind of conceptual experience of how I could, my agency over the outcomes.
Right. So you worked as a creative director, right? Well, on Spider-Man 2, you were a creative director.
Yeah.
Now, of course, this was almost a lifetime ago, right? I mean, now
Yeah.
if you think about it, so this question, we may not have up-to-date answers for these questions. But what is a creative director? Like, does it mean something specific to you? Because as I understand it, it means something completely different at every company, right? Like, creative director is a title that doesn't really have a fixed description.
I mean, one of the specific meanings for me is that it is not going to be the same from place to place.
Yeah.
Now, if I wanted to if I wanted a fixed position to describe creative director from, I'd start with creative direction. Creative direction is one thing, right? How do you take multiple people and have them look in the same direction? How do you place an objective out in the distance and have everyone look at it and go, we're going to head there? How do you get them all sufficiently on the same page so that when you use the same words about the project and you've kind of cut and paste from other experiences, the experience you're trying to get, doing a good job of that, I think makes the creative direction job better no matter where it's done, even if its definition is very flexible. I think some specifics for me were coordinating of code, design, and art. And so keeping the leadership on the same page. So that's more like project management direction in some ways, but for them all to be on the same page also means we're much more efficient. A lot less information is lost. It was sort of the first time that the organization I was in chose design to be in charge for real. And so that was kind of like this new experience, and we were trying to experiment with how should a game design heavy creative director run a project. And when I say we, I mean me and the other designers, because I had been with the team for a while, and that my team of senior designers was definitely sort of the crutch that I leaned on throughout the course of the project to succeed.
So, just as an aside, when you're working on Spider-Man, of course, this is pre-MCU Spider-Man.
Yes.
I also worked on a Marvel property pre-MCU, and I was kind of curious, how hard Marvel was to work with back then. I mean, in my case, the only thing I worked on an X-Men game, and I remember we needed a new character, and we didn't have enough time to add a new character to the game. This was like 1999, and I remember hey, a couple years ago, Magneto had a brother, Joseph, in the comic book, and he looks just like him. He just has a different head. So we could take, Magneto's model, put Joseph's head on it. Like, well, we got to go talk to Marvel, and we talked to Marvel, and they were like, Joseph's dead. You can't use him. That was the only time I ever witnessed sort of like editorial restrictions, but how much say did Marvel have? I feel like they were easier to work with maybe back then when Marvel was on the verge of bankruptcy or whatever. Well,
2000 and we made the Spider-Man 1 movie game as well as the Spider-Man 2 movie game. Mm-hmm. In that process, Activision's relationship with Marvel got pretty good because Spider-Man 1 made a lot of money. And so it put us in their good graces. They were very stringent, though, in terms of anything we were going to get into the game.
Yeah.
They were, no to anything significant. And by significant, everyone wanted Venom, everyone wanted Black Suit. None of that was happening in Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Man 1. We were also connected to Sony Columbia through their merchandising. So we had two primary IP stakeholders. We had Sony Columbia and Marvel. So for the most part, we just stayed out of it. We were just young devs. It wasn't like we were heavily involved in that relationship. It was more like watching two parents fight.
Yeah.
And we just did whatever came out of that interaction. Thankfully for Spider-Man 2, they didn't want us to have much access to the movie script. I think they were worried about for information security. And so that's actually one of the reasons why we had a lot of shelter to build that free open world swinging system. Mm-hmm. We didn't have to worry about any of the other details. We didn't know about them. And so we got to go there was about 25 people on the team from like the beginning to around month 6. And every single one of us dove headlong into Spider-Man swinging and other locomotion.
And that kind of set the tone for how Spider-Man swings in games, till today.
Yeah, no, it's still an argument. I mean, it's at least mostly a mostly solved argument because the new games are unbelievable.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it's still a topic, and that means it's a 20-year-old topic. It's funny.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those games that kind of created a paradigm for people just take for granted now. But that's at the time you had to invent how does Spider-Man swing in a game,
and it couldn't have happened without like a sufficiently large open world space to navigate through, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for GTA 3 and all the rest of us getting sort of obsessed with creating streaming worlds that were seamless. Now it seems so normal.
I know now. Yeah, now it's
people
expected.
don't want to do it because they're like, I don't need all that space.
You also worked in Electronic Arts, right?
Yeah.
And you were a producer and a lead designer at EA.
Yeah.
It's how does he? Well, again, like this is probably Stone Age information, but like back then at least, the EA production process. Now I had heard that at that time they didn't really have designers; they had like feature producers. Like you kind of like games were kind of assembled as features, and people had responsibility over those features.
So I wasn't on any of the projects that were like in the most rigid producer model of EA, but yeah, they thought of the producer more as like a stakeholder. And so the stakeholder was sort of setting creative goals, and then those had to be executed upon and try to be fulfilled. And then they would be sort of the arbiter of success on that work. I think they actually didn't, in some ways, they didn't have designers, at least at that kind of senior systems design level. And as a group, then they couldn't organize, kind of make the whole shape of the game. It was great being a producer because I could run shelter for the design team. I think I sort of saw myself as hacking the system, becoming a producer on Medal of Honor. That was a really fun project though, because I was so into military history and hadn't had a chance to have any of that be part of my work.
Right. So, and then from there, maybe not directly from there, but you went from major studio work to indie.
Yeah.
With some of your Treyarch brethren.
Yeah.
So have there been any sacrifices going to indie from AAA? Were the trade-offs worth it? I mean, to be honest, I think, again, we keep talking about things that are decades old. I mean, I think the way jobs were in AAA back then are far different now. I think that there's a lot of different, maybe even better opportunities in AAA, maybe than there were 20 years ago.
I think so.
Yeah, like I don't think developers are treated quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that makes it hard is the amount of demand for those positions now, right? And I feel like North America in particular, and its desire to have for the new people to have AAA console projects for their work puts a ton of demand, and there's always people looking for those jobs. But there's so much more diversity, and there's so many more roles, and there's so many more ways to be involved in making games now. And I mean, it's like Activision, especially, it's just a big machine. There's tons of things you can do.
Yeah, there's a lot more perks and benefits. I mean, crunch, like I've talked about before, like it still exists.
Yeah,
but I actually feel that a lot of studios, people kind of get compensated for crunch now. Like some of the people I know, I mean, they are selling off huge chunks of their life for money, but they do get paid, I think.
And that is certainly better than it was back in the day.
Yeah. That's why, like, I don't know about you, but sometimes when people come to me and be like, oh, I want to start a company, I'm like,
You have to start a company because you want to learn, because you want to suffer, because you want to change your brain chemistry.
Was the suffering worth it?
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, so the trade-off was, even though games is always uncertainty, going from a big AAA studio to your own company is a enormous increase in uncertainty.
Yes.
Overwhelming, I would have to say. In hindsight, I didn't really feel it at the time because I think any proper console systems designer from the early 2000s wished everything could be more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I did. I wished for it to be more complicated until I stopped wishing it was more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that your AAA background helped in going indie? Is there a point where the knowledge just becomes stale and you have to learn new tricks and your background isn't that helpful? Or do you think your foundation in AAA still guides you to this day?
So I would say that there was a ton of what we thought was true about making games from back then, which is totally not applicable.
Right.
And it's just basically just sort of foolish wives' tales that we kind of told ourselves about how things should be done. At the same time, I think there's a lot of really great lessons. I think as the industry got bigger and bigger, and as there was more and more role specialization, and there's also sort of a mentality for new people to have these assumptions about how things should be. Those assumptions are built off of assumptions we made in the early 2000s, which, by the way, is, again, to kind of go back to right as everything was scaling up, right? This PS2 era of old school game developers facing going from 20 to 60 to 90 to 120 man teams or person teams and not knowing how to navigate that scaling. The lessons, the things that we assume about what's right in game development are still some of those same things that didn't work back then. So it's a pretty shaky foundation. I see a lot of that in the stuff that I learned making those games, and largely because of how rugged it was, because of all the crunch and how painful it was. The lessons we learned were sort of practical reality lessons, the kind of the sniff test against whether something is going to have any impact in the software, learning that those things, that the complicated things that you're adding at the end that you felt was important are often just worthless. They're like a pet desire in the back of your head that you never verified, right? There's all these things like getting, because you only get the important stuff together first when you feel like you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. And if you never felt like you were in trouble, you never learned the skills to do that triage. And that stuff always is paying dividends constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of veterans kind of overweight their experience.
I agree. I agree with
it
that.
could be kind of irrelevant as quickly as time goes on. But there definitely still is some wisdom us oldsters can apply to newer or indie developers, I suppose. I think probably maybe the best thing a veteran knows is when a game is done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
fair.
I hear a lot of like, "Oh, this game's almost done." I look at it like, "You're so nowhere near done."
Yeah, exactly. No, I think I agree with that, but I'm also willing to say that most of the most important stuff I know about making games today isn't the stuff that I learned in those first few years.
Yeah.
Other than maybe there were some key leadership lessons, right? Like, why do we employ people if not for them to have agency over their work?
Yeah.
Right? It's like everyone likes to talk crap about micromanagers, but so many of us, when we move into leadership, start doing it. And so I think it's like a natural human inclination to think that you know better. But a phrase I like using is the person that puts the time in and does the work, they get to say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I agree. I mean, and that's how you get a demoralized team when you just. I also think micromanaging puts you in an early grade. Like, why do you want to give yourself all that stress?
You're suffering just as much as they are.
Yeah, it's like now you're doing their work too.
Yeah,
it's just
brutal.
It's ridiculous.
Sometimes I like talking about whether someone's really big paycheck is being spent to improve the team or is spent against the team.
Yeah. I mean, I like to basically work with people or hire people that I trust to do a good job. And all I need to know is, like, if you can't do something, just let me know so we can work around it. But I mean, people are responsible for what they're doing. And, you just have to, I mean, I guess you just have to not be suffering from Dunning-Kruger. Like, you have to be able to understand people's skill level and what to expect.
Yeah, self-awareness is huge. I feel like there are a bunch of times, when things are really hectic, you're less self-aware. I think I made more mistakes during the crazy busy times and probably lack of sleep. Mm-hmm. That's when it all happens. And then with a little bit of perspective and some time to kind of like take a bird's eye view on something, and then you can just clean up all of the silly mistakes.
Yeah.
The bad attitude mistakes.
So your game, Epic Tavern, it's been in early access for what? Almost a decade now?
Yeah, basically.
Big 10 years.
Yeah.
It's kind of like your pet project at Hyperkinetic. It's heavy on systems design. For those who don't know, it's a game where you run a tavern like in a fantasy
Yeah,
RPG.
it's like a light business sim to attract procedurally and custom generated characters into the tavern who become the protagonists of
It's
generated stories.
It's a management sim, kind of.
Yeah, and at the highest level, it's more of like a kind of a storytelling toy.
Right.
right? And then
Yeah.
and then the management sim elements and the RPG management, RPG character management part sort of supports that.
But it's heavy on systems design,
Yeah.
which is kind of your bag as of late. But like, how do you make management simulations fun? Because like at some point, isn't it like playing with a spreadsheet? Like, aren't you just like number crunching? Like, how do you make that fun for the player?
Well, so I think you make it fun for the player the same way you make anything fun for the player. There is like my idea of what the product of our work is has shifted over the years, and it's shifted to the change that our software has on the lived experience of the player who's engaging with the software. So whatever changes are happening to them, that's actually the product of our work. And so the way you make a management game interesting is you make the narrative of the person playing the game start trying to make that story a fun story. And so that in the same way that like, you know, let's say we're talking about like the first few episodes, Avatar: Last Airbender, like what makes the storytelling in those little animated 30-minute things enjoyable. And a lot of it is just sort of like building patterns and then having surprises appear, building more patterns, set expectations, setting an expectation for something to be successful and then swapping in something that's totally different but just as valid a success is sort of a fundamentally enjoyable atomic experience, let's say. And so how many different ways can you construct an experience where I read 4 sentences, click a button and see a die roll, and then get a couple more sentences that describe what happened? How do you make that interesting? And you can make it interesting. One, how would you make any 5 or 6 sentences interesting? How do you put the funny word at the end? Or do you put the confusing word at the beginning and then clarify it in the middle in a way that they weren't expecting? It's just the same. It's sort of the same, all the same tropes as any storytelling structure would improve. A normal story improves all of our systems. And so as a systems heavy game starts coming together, you really have to kind of try to cook the outputs to start creating those kinds of rhythms that people enjoy. And they really just adhere to storytelling rules, I think.
Do you think I've been thinking about this a little bit in some of my projects. Like, do you think like AI and LLMs can kind of like redefine how systems design works? Like, is it possible to use a large language model of some kind to like run the system and to create that narrative, but also keep track of like attributes and states?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's possible at some point, but I think that us systems designers would have to have a lot more clarity about all the details. Like in a lot, we'll build the systems and then we put them together and then we see what comes out. And we're trying to get a certain set, well, hopefully we're trying to get a certain set of results, a set of results that we like. And we think that these machines, when they work together, will create that result. If I could articulate all of the ways in which these two machines, let's say 2 random systems in a game, are interacting with each other at a very detailed level, then maybe I could reflect it as like a sequence of instructions. And maybe I could just use plain language and tell an LLM to do something similar to that, or create a framework or an outline that could do that. But I would need to be better. I would need to be more fluent in a typical pair of systems to do that. So it would take more work than less work for now.
Yeah. I mean, like I've spent a lot of time telling LLMs specifically not to do something, and they do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so I'm not really even sure, because I've been thinking about this for a couple things, like how to make an LLM interact with the state of a game, and then use the LLM to generate content, as in like maybe narrative content or quests.
Yeah.
But it's like I don't know. I can't find a way yet to prevent the LLM from going off the rails and doing whatever it wants.
Well, I mean, you know how like you can have an LLM soften the tone of your email?
Yeah.
So I think you could like have maybe schematic text and then have it soften it into just plain language. That's pretty safe.
Right. Like what if you... Yeah, what if your system just outputted like orc died, found treasure, this, that, the third, and then you tell the LLM, turn this into a 2-paragraph story. Maybe that's interesting.
Include the names of the actual characters.
Right, yeah.
Which, by the way, what's funny is Epic Tavern is kind of like us pantomiming like an LLM.
Right.
Ultimately, like all of our systems, it's like we have for example, a system that tries to look for opportunities to unlock a quest. Certain characters need to meet certain criteria. They need to have a certain amount of activity under their belt. They need to have been on this one quest. And then this other quest, let's say it's like the quest to become the archdruid of the land, becomes unlocked or available, and this character can do it. So that means this character has been found to be eligible to become an archdruid, and now a quest can appear and be available for them to do. Now, how do I get more general than that, right? More general than the criteria on the character, this criteria of having had to do this quest in advance, and to have this list of quests that are looking for these criteria to be met, and then move into an availability mode where then it can maybe appear in the tavern. So all that we did by hand, and just not exactly, but like a complicated set of triggers, basically.
Right.
The question is, how do you make the LLM work for you in such a way that, would the goal be to be more general, or would the goal be for it to actually functionally create things that work without you having to do the testing?
I don't know. The goal for me would be, I don't really have a lot of money for a budget, and creating gigantic stacks of narrative. I never really thought of that. That's kind of fascinating. It's like you outputting the raw material of what happened, the game facts from the world state, and having the LLM make it sound good. That's kind of interesting.
It's a narrow use case that leans on its strength, at least.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because LLMs are good at doing things that don't need to be accurate, or that have a minimum set of facts that it has to choose from.
Totally.
That's kind of fascinating. I don't know. Because another problem I have, and this is purely for text, because I've been talking about this challenge with some other developers. It's like the LLM, as is the case with any text, a novel or whatever, you can say whatever you want, but representing that visually, representing that in the game is a problem. So although an LLM could generate infinite outcomes for a quest, how do you represent that other than text?
Well, that's the thing, right? And that's why we chose text for Epic Tavern. We have a universal text-based event system, so that we could tell all the parts of a story that we wanted to. But if we had, I guess, we could build an entire combat system. But typically, if you were to do that in a game, it's so costly and takes so much of a percentage of your development bandwidth that the game has to be about combat.
Yeah.
And then if I were to say let's build a system for resolving social encounters, that just seems out of scope for anybody.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That's it. Okay. I'm gonna have to prototype something. That's I like that idea.
But the part of the problem, I guess, no, the LLMs are getting small enough. You could probably have them local.
Yeah, no, you can. So, NVIDIA announced their new chips. Of course, you'd have to make something that only runs on a 5 series GPU. But you can embed I think I saw GPT-2, which I don't know how good that is, but you could run that in JavaScript now. So there are ways to do it. That's another thing, of course, the cost. And I think my prediction is, you heard it here first, but my prediction is the next generation of consoles, not including Switch 2, I'm guessing will probably have an extra GPU to run some form of AI locally.
Yeah.
Because why not?
Totally.
And I think it's gonna be interesting, because I believe that it's gonna be the first console generation where you can actually do something different gameplay wise. The past 2 or 3, it's been better graphics. You can do some new things. I don't think we've saw any breakout new types of games necessarily. I could be wrong, but I think this extra GPU or some sort of LLM optimized chip could open up some new possibilities.
It would immediately take away a lot of the awkwardness in a social deduction game that was going to be single player and we have AIs. Being able to have a conversation, as long as you don't have to tap the internet every time you want to parse.
And I've talked to people who are tapping the internet in their games, and I'm like, you're crazy, because if your game's successful, you go broke.
It's too costly. It's not the right relationship to cost. But if you could, I remember downloading games years ago that were 60, 80 gigabytes.
Yeah.
Well, you could fit a small LLM into that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like
then it could run all of your NPC conversations.
Yeah.
They just sound less weird.
The only problem is, of course, I don't know if you can run into the same problem, but I have a personal problem with games that rely on a lot of procedurally generated content. No Man's Sky is an interesting example. I think the game is fascinating, but ultimately everything's meaningless because everything's random.
Oh, for sure. None of this is necessarily going to be good.
It could be, though. There could be a way.
Good taming of, but it doesn't happen at first, right?
Right.
Because everyone's excited about all the variation, And then No Man's Sky is probably the best example. Like, oh great, 4 quadrillion variations
But hey, what am I
of anything.
Who are we to say that game is wildly successsuccessful?
Yeah, it's wildly successful, but not because it's got 4 quadrillion solar systems.
I don't. You know what? I don't actually know because it's not my like. I'm not saying I don't think it's a bad game. It's just not to my taste, perhaps. So I don't know what people really like. I'd have to actually do some research on what people really do like about it.
I felt like it was beautiful.
Yeah,
and the ramp into getting to that, finding some of those beautiful moments.
Yeah.
In some ways, some of the awkwardness or some of the maybe sameness that you'd run into tease you up for a great unexpected moment.
Yeah. I've been meaning to play it again.
They've also been adding a bunch more sort of
there's tons of new
organizing stuff. the randomness.
I'm gonna have to play it again.
It's made it better
because I haven't played it since it came out, and when it came out, I just kind of was like, "What am I doing?" Like, I know enough about how this game works that I'm not ever gonna get anywhere. But now they've added so much to it. I've been meaning to just play it again. Okay, I saw an interesting talk, which is 10 years old now, of yours. And it's almost like...
of mine?
Yes. Because I was doing some research.
Uh-huh.
And it's again, this is a bygone era. I can't believe we're talking about this like it was a million years ago, but it was a million years ago. But there was a time when all of us game developers were pissed off, as some of us still are, about mobile games.
Sure.
And how they're just hamster wheels, which I actually still believe. I think mobile games are generally... My hot take is that there's no such thing as mobile games. They're not games. They're not. I'm not saying they're not entertaining, but they're slot machines. Slot machines aren't games either. It's gaming.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so, but I saw a talk, and this is kind of funny because people probably don't even remember this era, but there was that era where like Facebook games and then mobile games were taking over, and people were like, "Why is Farmville making so much money? I don't get it." And basically, I saw you give a talk about. How you hated those games, but you decided they were so successful that you're going to force yourself to play Cityville for 200 hours until you liked it.
I described this as a life-changing moment,
yes.
actually. It was probably the most significant step in my life towards being less biased and prejudiced.
In general, too, not just
in life.
Right. So you try to, you understood people that you don't understand. Like, why would anybody like this game? You had to deep dive.
And it was, and because 200 hours is actually a very relatively short period of time in my life, because this was over the course of, let's say, less than a year, I still remember what it felt like to say, I would say things like, they shouldn't be allowed to spend money on this. Or, I definitely would say, this is not a game. And all kinds of really terrible things in hindsight, which were terrible, ignorant things to say about people I knew nothing about. And over the course of that period of time, I recognized that there's totally a valid experience to be had there. Plenty of fun to be had, just not in any of the ways that were conventionally what I would do in the past. I didn't keep up with it much, but I found Cityville to be an interesting exploration. And it was fun to spend. I mean, by the time I started enjoying it, I was also kind of done with it as well. But this idea that I could make my city in interesting ways and have friends, the few friends that were playing those games, have them notice. We even had a few conversations about it, which was fun. Appointment-based gaming, at least in the model of Farmville and Cityville, to me didn't feel like it had like a really, really sustainable long-term enjoyment. So once you kind of mastered that, it did become sort of rote. But then I recognized how that could take on some sort of like meditative, repetitive kind of aspects to it that people can kind of cling to. It's like, I don't want to mess up my Duolingo streak or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I kind of think I just think there's a couple different types of design, but I kind of feel like there's, mechanics-based design, but there's also compulsion-based design. And I kind of feel like most mobile games are compulsion-based designs. They're just compulsion loops that, much like gambling. That's why I just consider them mostly slot machines.
But I don't think Diablo 2 is necessarily different from that,
I don't
right?
disagree. I mean, I played Diablo 3 when it came out, and I had to go for a walk. I was like, what am I doing in my life? This is the most pointless. And no shots. Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not what I want out of a game, but like all I'm doing is clicking on stuff, and then a bunch of crap flies out of them, and then I collect them, and then I see which one is 0.05% better than what I currently have equipped.
Totally.
And I'm like, I remember I had to go for like this walk. I'm like, I can't, like, it makes you question your existence. Like, what am I doing?
Nice.
It's just pointless.
I totally agree. And then what hurt me so bad in D3 was I get to the end, get to 100, I get to the end of the highest difficulty, and then I go to the real money auction house, and within 15 minutes and spending about $3, I jumped forward hundreds of hours of play. And then I had like a my heart sank, and I'm like, oh my god, this is broken.
I mean, I'm not saying, so-called real games are better, because a lot of these games follow the same tropes. I mean, I feel like games like Diablo are kind of, the same kind of thing. It's just a different skin on that type of mechanic.
And what about like Last of Us? Like the story's drawing me through it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean,
and sometimes it's but what happens when the story's what's drawing me through, the mechanics light sort of hamster wheel kind of experience, right? Yeah. I mean, they're just that I see a lot of it. There are a lot of similarities on different axes and a lot of really stark differences. Mm-hmm. But so many of the differences are just all the ways to interact with a screen that we didn't do in 2004 and earlier.
So you had to understand your audience, because you can't have contempt for the audience that you're making the games for.
Or at least you should.
Like, can you make a game?
Like a liability, at least.
Can you make a game in a genre that you don't like?
I mean, I think you can, but I don't think you can do it well.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the way I like to put it is, if you can't enjoy that type of game, if there was a quintessential type of the game that you're trying to make, if you can't like that game, then you're in no position to make your version of the game a thing that the users of that game will like.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I've never liked it, then I don't know any of those sort of like emotional touch points or hooks or triggers that keep me there, make it so that I spend hundreds of hours, right? I know all the things, okay, maybe not literally everything, but I know most of the things that drive a person to like Oblivion, for example, because I have, 300 some odd hours in it, right? And so I can speak to hundreds of moments that are like ranging from kind of nice to amazing and mind-blowing. And even then, I'm going to get some of it wrong because, something I've been teaching level design at Art Center since last January, and it's helped me organize my thoughts. I don't know if it's been good for the students, but I might have just lost what I was about to say. With what was I saying here? With Oblivion, and
you learned something about your 300 hours taught you something about the game.
Oh yeah. So I keep trying to explain the difference between having a player mentality and a developer mentality when it comes to making games. And the player mentality takes these great recollections, right, and then tries to make them happen in the software. So you build the great moment. But I think as we become more of a developer mentality focused person, we're just trying to get the player to that great moment, and we stop worrying about the great moment. And in a lot of ways, you could sort of see if this feels right. New developers or players sort of criticizing the quality of the great moment in a game because they're just judging it by itself, not recognizing all the things we have to do to condition the player's experience so that a moment is great. And that knowing the difference between those two things is huge. And at the same time, I could maybe make those moments better. But what makes them work isn't actually that part, right? Mm-hmm. It's everything that leads up to it. So even me talking about all these moments in Skyrim and Oblivion that are awesome, if I don't also have the lived experience of the ramp up to those moments, I may not be able to create them either.
Right.
And liking the experience, enjoying the experience is like gives you that's so you have a prayer at being able to construct those strings.
So, I mean, do you ever make anything completely new, or is everything based off something else? Like, I feel like users, don't know what they want until you show them what it is. But how hard is it today to actually come up with something that they haven't seen yet? Like, I think that, are we all just building off of other people's games and making them better?
I think mostly. It's fair to say mostly yes.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think every year, I think we're seeing legitimate remixes of systems and genres that weren't expected the year before that sometimes meet with breakout success. I'm thinking of like Vampire Survivors or Balatro or even uh, BG3. I think Disco Elysium counts. There or what's and Blueprints. All
Mm-hmm.
these games are constructed from or cut and paste from all these experiences that we've had that we're familiar with, but put together in ways that certainly very interesting, if not sort of mind blowing, or sets the tone for a future that we weren't thinking of before that title came out.
Yeah, and they come from a lot of these games. They come from people who are not from the industry, or they're not. They've come from outside of the industry or indie circles that weren't even thinking of making a business out of them.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like the publisher world, the business world, the investment world, they're so risk averse, but also like it's almost impossible to capture that kind of lightning in a bottle. Like it's a hard business model to innovate because you can't just like give a bunch of people a bunch of money and innovation doesn't necessarily come out of that.
Yeah, it's like you can't buy it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, if I wanted to, if we take it all the way to the limit and go, because I know so much about the industry, I can't think of something new.
Yeah, that's a good
Right?
point.
I think
yeah.
it's a reasonable thing to be afraid of. That like we're so good at the language we have, we're unwilling to build new language, so that way we can't make new stuff.
Yeah, like I used to not want to hear like some guy like, I've got a good game idea. I'm like, oh God, fuck this guy. But now I'm like, I want to hear what this wacko has to say.
Yeah.
Because now, especially because nowadays technology is so flexible.
Totally.
They used to be like, I can only have 8 textures. I have to, but now it's like I can slap stuff together, crazy stuff, and ship it, and it still runs even on a phone.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of wacky nonsense ideas can even be tested to the point where you can see if they're commercially viable. I just don't think, a few times I've been approached by people who want to maybe create an incubator. And it's kind of like my dream would be great. Let's get some money, get some people, and put some stuff and see what happens. But I can't actually explain to that person, like, well, you're probably not going to make any money. Like, this is probably not going to amount to anything, but it could.
There's got to be a better way to sell that idea, right?
Well, I mean, but the thing is like, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier. I feel like films get invested in because people like films and want to make a film, and they also want to be cool and hang out with movie stars or whatever. Games is traditionally invested in as a software business, and they don't really have any tolerance for that kind of like, they're not really interested in the process or even the product or the culture to the degree to which it exists. So, I find it hard to get people excited about ideas in this type of thing, in this type of world.
Maybe industry just hasn't reached a point of maturity where it can self-assess well enough to figure out how to keep things fresh, right? I think it's an unaddressed topic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we can safely say that some of the difficulty the industry is in today is sort of partly related to the funding mechanisms in our industry not having like a rationale for figuring out how the future should be for the industry. It's, there are loose sort of adherences to KPIs and trying to do analyses of genres or platforms, but it's not like the combining of an executive producer and like sort of truly creative product envisioning is not something that we see in our industry. I think what ends up happening is that all of us have to go running out there and experimenting and sort of hoping for the best. And some of us almost certainly find great matches, and then we sort of accidentally expose a valid part of like the periodic table of elements. There is no science of analyzing the elements we found so far and what they can lead to. We don't have like that physics yet, or at least not broadly. I'm sure there are a handful of people that know the magic, and they're probably doing great. And that's good for them. I want to talk to them more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're seeing, this is sort of like the first time in our industry that we can do that because we have enough breadth and enough variety and enough people doing different things. Because I mean, you go back to like early 2000s, there was only one way things were done, right?
Yeah.
Before mobile, before, like, there was a little bit of browser stuff probably happening right by the time we get to 2004, maybe.
Wasn't a lot of shared knowledge either. It was like I remember working on a game and the designer was telling me, "Oh, we want to have these summons that, you know, are kind of like Final Fantasy summons." And I had to explain to them, and this is a joke, team size, but at that time, do you know Final Fantasy VII had over 100 people on staff, which at the time was crazy.
Yeah,
we had
overwhelming.
8. Oh wait, what? I'm like, yeah, that's not how this works. Or it was, a lot of cargo cult design process. I remember in a magazine we saw that for Metal Gear Solid, Kojima mocked him up with Legos. So I come into the office one day and the designer's on the floor with Legos trying to design maps for a fighting game, and I'm just, hey, this is what Kojima did. This must mean we're gonna, I don't know. There wasn't a lot of, the knowledge, the development knowledge wasn't very widespread.
Well, and I'd say that we were generally young, probably skewed neurodivergent, probably a little light on education. Mm-hmm. I feel like that was everybody I was working with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, I've gotten pretty skilled at navigating difficult personalities or, different types of people.
It seems so normal from back then.
Yeah, and I kind of find when people, I don't know, it's like I find that, a lot of what I thought was normal might have not been normal.
Oh my God, no.
But what is normal, really? Who's to say?
Well, I mean, if you're gonna concentrate a small portion of the user demographic, though, and put them all together and give them no access to any other type of person, I think we're going to find some interesting results. And it certainly seems like that's what happened.
So speaking about kind of what we were talking about, I kind of had this idea, are we in a post-design world? Like, can you, like, for instance, I don't know their name. I read about this group. They had a party at some LA development summit last year, but I couldn't get an invite. But there's some crazy group of like kids. I'll call them kids because I'm old. And they're in their 20s.
Yeah.
But they make apps based off TikTok trends. And they're able to look at a trending video of TikTok, build an app around it, like whether it's like some wellness trend or whatever, and get, 1 million downloads of these apps. And they're able to build them super quick, and they're constantly monitoring social media trends and then building apps based off of that. And I thought to myself, like, I wanted to go there to see their process because I'm like, tools are so easy to use now. Games are so easy to distribute. Do we really need a complicated design? Can we make a game that's like, now this vibe coding or whatever, but can you make something that capitalizes on a trend really fast, spit it out, and then do another one, and people get their 2 hours of enjoyment from it? I don't know how you monetize this, but, the days of crafting and experience over 2-3 years, has it given way to, a post-design world where it's just sort of like crafting an experience around weird ephemeral trends.
Well, I mean, the ephemeral trends definitely seems like a totally valid space. And maybe it's the normal space now. I mean, I guess the question would be like, what were we doing before making those games like that? Right? I mean, I think... I used to go, when I started my company 1 billion years ago, I was making flip phone games. My hero was Roger Corman, right? When I was in college, I read his biography, and I'm like, this is my idol. Like, I love film, but I wanted to be more like Roger Corman than, whatever. Like, I liked his style of just, he made money, he had fun, but one of the things he did was his movies were torn from, that's what the term exploitation film comes from. You exploit trends. So I remember I used to go to the bookstore back when we still had them. I go to Barnes & Noble and I just look at the magazines. And if I saw more than like 4 magazines on a topic, I'd be like, I need to make a game about that. Nice.
There's 6 magazines about cats. That seems to be a thing. This is before,
And the cat games worked.
Right. And so that, so today I'm like the modern equivalent of that. What's popping on TikTok? Can you make a game around this trend? Can you get it out before the trend's over?
Yeah, that's tricky. That's what's tricky. I think in the normal Steam indie space, like it's still in normal time, that you can see a trend happen on month 1 and that trend will still be happening month 8. Mm-hmm. You could make a small game to try to exploit that window, right? And be in that theme and maybe explore some of those ideas. Plenty of people made Vampire Survivors likes.
Oh yeah, some of them are done quite well.
Bullet Heavens and plenty of them did great. And some legitimately cool games came out of that effort as well. Mm-hmm. Kind of pushing a little bit out of the normal space of Vampire Survivors. I mean, I think are we in a convergent phase where everything's now starting to take all of the systems from all the disparate games and seeing how they can be used together? I mean, I feel like, the roguelike used to be a genre, but I don't think it is anymore. I think now it's just there are a collection of systems that tend to get used together, and now maybe that's just a normal game.
Well, it's kind of like what happened after I feel GTA San Andreas had RPG mechanics in it,
Yeah.
which were identified as that was an RPG. Those things are from RPGs, and now that type of mechanics in everything.
Totally, because progression is just a piece of the puzzle. In fact, you should have a progression strategy. It's allowed to be, we have no features that allow for any systemic progression, but then even still, your progression strategy has to do with the information state of the player and what they learn as they play, or if they're action mechanics, that how many times do they have to jump across this gap before they don't die later on in the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are, I think more designers understand progression now because of that it became normal to incentivize play. And granted, at the same time, it also turned us all into the thing that maybe lots of North American game devs like complaining about in terms of free to play and mobile.
Right.
Like, we do those things all the time now. We say they're bad, but my joke used to be that Skyrim only charges me once and only and it's still willing to take all my time. Who's more evil, the people that keep making me pay or the people that don't worry about the money and they're up for destroying my life anyway?
That's kind of, I think that's leading to an issue. A lot of the problems we have with the game industry now is games are too good or they consume too much of your time. They never end. They're designed as a hamster wheel. That Cityville hamster wheel design philosophy has infected everything to the point now where games never end and there's no end to the progress. Like you never complete anything. There's always more experience points to get. And so people could just play this game forever and not buy another game.
Well, and I think that causes some legit health issues.
Oh yeah.
Like, especially like hardcore action or hardcore action with free-to-play elements or microtransactions or long tail or season. Those games, like, generally they're kind of dopamine dumps to begin with, right? Like, I have excess engagement power and I'm going to burn that power to the ground playing Counter-Strike for 4 hours a day or something, right? If those games are brutal. If you know life those games for like 3 months straight, your brain is scrambled. I know it. I've done it.
No lifing a game. I've never even heard that. I like that term.
And I feel like it's kind of like the first time you found Napster. You stayed up till 4 a.m. and like melted your brain downloading music you didn't care about. It's the same sort of thing with all of these kinds of like high octane engagement structures. I feel like I've been addicted to all of them, and more or less, more likely to survive if I can get over all of them too.
So if somebody wants to be a game developer, be in the game development industry, what do you like? I have a hard time when people come to me and say, "Oh, I want to do." First, it doesn't happen that often, but some people might say, "Oh, I want to kind of do what you do," which I'm like, "Well, do you even know what I do?" But I just kind of say you probably shouldn't. Because when I did it, there was no such thing as big tech. There were no great jobs at like Meta or Google. These things did not exist.
Yeah.
There's so many more options today that are way better than trying to scrape your way through a game development career. I guess what would you say to people who come up to you and quote unquote want to be a game developer?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think there are two types, right? There's going to be the type that hasn't thought about it enough. And they like the games they play so much. And they think that if they can be a part of that they'll be happy. And for them, they just need to think things through more. They need to understand themselves better and recognize that they aren't just the most fun they've had in a piece of entertainment. But for some people, they have language to describe experiences and they want to make things for other people. They're going to find like a passion in that authorship, let's say. And if I can identify that, then it's a very different conversation. It's like, totally, go for it. Just practice kind of, in an aphantasia sort of topic, practice how much resolution your imagination has and understand, this form of entertainment, understand all forms of entertainment and get to making things because that is fun and satisfying. Then finding a way to get paid for it almost guarantees you'll get a lot of practice doing it and then you'll get good at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of easier today. It's people can just make games. I always tell people, it's why haven't you made a game yet? The tools are available to everybody. But I also kind of feel when I was starting out, you could look at people and be like, I want to be like that guy. When you bought a game from Activision, they had a picture of the guy or girls, Carol Shaw, whatever, whoever made the game was in the book. And you're like, oh, that's cool. That person seems to have a cool job. And now I wonder if the same thing applies because teams have thousands of people, and it's
if you're going to the big team, it's not the same.
Like I want to be a texture artist on the gun dynamics team of Call of Duty.
Seriously, no. It's if you're for big teams, it's too specialized. You won't get if the authorship is what you're looking for. You don't get it.
Yeah.
Right, and then maybe you'll get it years later if you struggle and climb the ladder and get into those very limited spots of leadership. That's the other thing, right? Like. I never would have been able to get promoted into a position of leadership, I think, in today's world. I mean, I didn't have the right attitude back then, but I needed to have started back then so I could get to here now. And so if I moved my life forward 20 years, I'd just probably be stuck.
Yeah. It's always, there's always the, what could have been. You never really can tell. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like I talk to, studio people who want to do indie stuff, and then indie people want to do studio. Nobody's happy.
Totally.
Everybody wants what the other person has, and they don't realize that it might not be what they want.
Okay, so running company is lots of uncertainty and lots of risk taking. I think that every one of them probably appreciates boring more than they used to. Everyone who's been in a ton of uncertainty feels like boring is better than it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm a big appreciator of it. Maybe I'm too habituated into like swimming in uncertainty and dealing with complexity. Like I still find myself naturally going there and enjoying that. But some conscious part of my brain is trying to find a way to live boring for at least some part of my life before I die.
Yeah, I saw a thread on on Blue Sky or something where young Gen Z types were goofing on the Matrix because they're like, wow, the Matrix, he starts off Neo like, wow, my job is too stable and I make too much money and I'm too comfortable of a living. This sucks. And they were saying, did people in 1999 really think that way? And I was thinking about that a lot. And I was just
like, yeah, we did.
Yeah, we really did.
So did.
And now we would probably all, be envious of such a boring, predictable lifestyle.
It's like, can I just take the blue pill for a couple months?
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Of course, that movie was pre.com crash. So, but yeah, I agree. Sometimes these days I fantasize about the more boring existence. However, also, we've been able to create things out of thin air that now exist.
Yeah.
And that's cool. And I find a lot of people, live in this perpetual state of, I would like to have done this or like to have done that. They have a lot of project ideas or things that they would like to make and they never make them. Was it worth it? Well, we'll find out at the end, I suppose.
I mean, so far I'd say it's worth it
for
me. I mean, I think I am addicted to figuring things out and learning about stuff and figuring out how things work. This has been good 25 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, there have been ups and downs, and not all the ups are the good parts, not all the downs are the bad parts. There's been, and we get to meet super interesting people.
Yeah. That's true.
And like now we've known them or each other for like more than 10 years, more than 20 years sometimes. And you get to see all the patterns of smart people getting good at stuff, moving into this or that, evolving into this or that. And then we get to try to do it ourselves. It's a big pile of fun. The only thing we got wrong is that the proportion of boring is too small.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you have a family, right? You've raised you've been able to pull off, this sort of stable family life role in also navigating the insanity of running a business and being an independent.
So none of the good stuff in the family has happened during running the business.
Okay.
That has definitely been that has caused some tension. But
yes.
I had a number of like sort of halcyon years of consulting before that.
Right.
And that was very nice.
So that's included in the 25 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, because that's the thing about consulting. To me, consulting, you eat what you kill.
Yeah.
I had a period of time where, I was producing games that I sold on mobile. That's an asset-based business. Then I flipped to a service-based business, which was consulting, but that was very roller coastery, right? Because, you know, when you sell games on Steam or whatever, you make money while you sleep. But if you're consulting, you have to keep working, and when you stop working, you stop making money.
Totally.
But also, it can kind of fill in the gaps when stuff you're selling isn't out or isn't selling anymore. There's a balance.
There's something I was realizing. I was talking to somebody, and we were having a conversation about why something failed. I'm trying to remember the details. Okay, I'm going to let go of the details. But so we were really, well, the punchline was, it looks like my friend would choose personal growth over success sometimes. And then I immediately realized that mostly I did exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's that we chose the more interesting path repeatedly and perhaps irresponsibly. That this choice that would have been smarter, it might have even been easier sometimes, and clearly more likely to result in success. But no, we went this harder way. We went this harder way that was more interesting, that had more uncertainty, that there was more unknowns to explore. There was access to interesting experiences that had much lower chances of success, right? That if that choice is something that you're making over and over and over and over again, maybe that's just on me.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also a degree of, you know, survivorship bias or whatever. Like I know a lot of people who, you know, I look at the people who have the quote unquote boring existence in some of these companies who've done quite well, but I know plenty of people who didn't. You know, people who moved every year, they kept getting laid off.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've been able to live basically in the same place for 25 years. It's not easy, but I know people who've had to travel all around the world for a job. Like, and it's funny too, because they would come to me. I remember occasionally, I've tried to fire myself several times, but also people have tried to recruit me for certain teams, and I can see the writing on the wall. Like, I remember this one particular team at a large console publisher was asking me if I wanted to work there, and I was thinking to myself, like, you're all getting laid off. Like, the game you're working on is not going to sell, and they're gonna. I didn't say this to them, but in my mind, I'm like, nah, I'm good, and that's what happened. Like, and now we see with the layoffs going on today too. It's like, you know, it's. I kind of feel like, you know, if you're running your own thing, you're always hunting for the opportunity or the money or whatever. Yeah. But when you're working at a company, you're kind of caught off guard when that happens. And does that make it any easier? I don't know. You kind of feel like you have more agency. You're able to do something about it.
Having the agency is really good for your emotional stability.
Yeah.
And then having the money is like really good for your like physical stability.
Yeah, for everything else. Yeah.
But no, I think that brings up a really good point though about the big companies. Like they're not designed so that the employees necessarily feel good. I mean, their amenities are given to them, right, to try to counteract lower morale or weak morale. There's tons of hidden information. There's tons of enforced hidden information, which keeps people more apart from each other. I mean, that was one nice thing about Hyperkinetic Studios. Like, we were a very tight-knit family, and we had no choice. Since things were always sort of by the seat of our pants, getting whatever projects were available to us, we were just ultra honest to everyone in the company.
Yeah, I mean, you're all with smaller companies. You can I do that, but I kind of feel like I was talking about this with someone the other day. Transparency can be a problem because if you're super transparent as a company owner, you're making all your problems your employees' problems.
Sure.
And they really need to be focusing on, like, they got to write the code, they got to do the art. They don't need to be focusing on shit. This company might go out of business because, you know, this guy can't lock a deal down. And so there's always that balance of, you know, I know people who got pissed off because we didn't know and they shut the company down. We all got laid off. But when do you tell people you're out of business?
Yeah, I know. I think past a certain scale, it is not wrong to just do it the way it is done at large scale companies, which is we have no context to tell everyone, and it just is smoother and less of a nightmare. People are laid off, we give you your package, and there's just no talk about it, and there's no warning about it. It just is what it is. Leave it be. I think as it gets smaller and smaller, you're in a position to play some interesting experiments out of it. Yeah. Right? Like, I think our approach was that everyone on the team should be able to handle the position above them. And or, hey, are you at all interested? We'll bring you along. Let's give you FaceTime. with clients. Let's give you FaceTime with like communicating to other business entities. And that was a ton of fun. I mean, granted, I think all the people we hired, we met through socializing, and you know, it's all connections of connections, lots and lots of friendships. I think the last, you know, all of Hyperkinetic has been sort of a giant friend network experiment.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's good. I think we can. I think it was a solid. I don't know if there's anything else you want to feel, anything you want to promote or whatever. But Epic Tavern, go download it.
Nice, totally.
We got like a 10th anniversary. Is that a been? Is it our? Is it?
Oh my God!
Has it passed
that'll
yet?
that'll happen soon. That'll happen soon. Maybe we'll get out of early access on our 10th.
That's what you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thanks.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem.